From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. We begin in Mexico, where migrants at a shelter near the U.S.-Mexico border are reluctant to leave for a new shelter miles away from the crossing. Local authorities have been relocating the migrants to a new shelter far away from the border after heavy rain flooded the old one. However, many migrants are refusing to leave, saying they do not want to be so far away from the crossing. Authorities have pledged not to carry out forced evictions, but have cut off all service to the old shelter so that migrants have to leave. Our correspondent in Mexico, Pablo Perez, brings us the details.
Here right behind me, you can see what is left of the shelter at the Benito Juarez Sport Complex here in Tijuana. Heavy rain and deteriorating conditions has made it uninhabitable, plus a cut in services to migrants has forced many out. Yet still about 400 people remain camped outside. They are reluctant to move to another location being offered to them. That's because it's located in an unsafe neighborhood. Just over 2 weeks ago, these migrants arrived here, and now they're being told it's time to move again. Meanwhile, as many as 2,000 people are being temporarily housed at the El Barretal building. The facility has become the newest shelter for Central American migrants seeking a better life in the U.S.
Thank you, Pablo, for that report. The Vice President of Ecuador, María Alejandra Vicuña, has resigned. This comes after accusations were made against her for allegedly requesting illegal payments from members of her party. On Monday, President Lenín Moreno suspended her from her duties. Vicuña says she's resigning to save Ecuador from instability.
A person with no shame has been used to accuse me on TV, with nobody double-checking, without anyone asking me. 77 lawmakers in the Assembly have asked for my resignation as they believe this pack of lies, denying me the most basic right to defense. Don't doubt, I will continue working for Ecuador. I have no need for high office to do that.
Our correspondent in Quito, Denise Herrera, has the latest.
Ecuadorian Vice President María Alejandra Vicuña announced her resignation to the government of Lenín Moreno after she was accused of corruption. She said that she will take time to defend herself. Also today in Ecuador, Colombian President Iván Duque and Ecuador's President Lenín Moreno have met today at the government palace under the ministerial meeting, where they discussed issues related with investment, trade, security, and the border. President Lenín Moreno said that Ecuador is committed to fight drug trafficking and the organized crime. Also, the president of Colombia, Iván Duque, expressed his solidarity with the relatives of the journalist who died at the border with Colombia, and also said that Colombia opens the door for investment with Ecuador, and also said that Colombia is interested to continue working jointly with Ecuador. It's all the information we have for now. Back to you at the studios.
Thank you, Denise, for that report. The Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro is in Russia for a visit that will boost economic and political ties. Our correspondent in Moscow, Hansel Oro, has the details.
President Maduro is coming to Moscow on a working visit, as he announced a few hours earlier on Twitter. The visit comes immediately after the Venezuelan president hosted his Turkish counterpart, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, in Caracas. On Wednesday, Maduro will meet the Russian President Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin. They'll be talking about the strategic challenge of boosting economic and trade links, especially in the face of sanctions imposed by the United States on both Russia and Venezuela. Last time the two leaders met in Moscow was a little over a year ago, when President Maduro came to the Russian Energy Week. On that occasion, the Venezuelan president put forward the idea of adopting a basket of currencies for trade in oil, as an alternative to the US dollar. This idea has also been taken up by Russia, and given the unilateral sanctions imposed by Washington, Moscow has been increasing its trade with Asia, especially China, and with Latin America, including Venezuela. For example, the Russian energy company Gazprom has a number of agreements to work with Venezuela in its Orinoco oil belt. there's also the Petro, Venezuela's cryptocurrency, where there is talk of cooperation with Russia's Association for Cryptocurrencies and Blockchain. We should learn more about that tomorrow when the presidents meet, and we'll be following all the developments on President Maduro's visit here in Moscow.
On Monday, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan slammed the use of sanctions on Venezuela during a visit to the country to bolster economic ties. His statement came after a meeting with President Maduro.
Demonstrating resistance is a very noble position for Venezuela. We know that countries want to dominate and pressure as they do with the rest of the world, and they have even threatened their lives and personal integrity. But no cowardly action and no threat can overthrow the will of the Venezuelan people. I condemn it.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back. Hundreds of terminated Petrotrin workers in Trinidad and Tobago were dealt another blow. The former employees claimed they were chased away by security workers when they went to the state oil company's office to process their payments. They were told there was no one there to receive them. The refinery ceased operation last Friday. Roughly 2,000 workers were impacted.
A cash injection of $25 billion to stay alive.
Colors in Cayman Islands have killed almost 200,000 green iguanas, and that's just over the past 5 weeks. Grand Cayman is overrun with an estimated 1.5 million iguanas. The population expands rapidly each year, so a certain number need to be killed. The nationwide culling also aims to protect the native grand blue iguana, which is being overrun by the green species that is breeding at a fast rate.
Iguanas naturally belong to Central and South America.
Costa Rica has finally approved its controversial tax reform, which triggered one of the country's largest strikes over the past 3 months. On Monday, President Carlos Alvarado signed it into a law, 2 hours after it was passed by Congress. He said that with the reform, the country had avoided an economic crisis. The law was the basis of a strong confrontation between the government and workers' unions. Our correspondent in San Jose, Fernando Francia, has more.
Costa Rican lawmakers have approved the tax reform promoted by the government. These measures have opened up a debate and prompted a strike that lasted for 80 days. Different trade unions around the country have been the main opponents to this tax reform package, and were joined by social movements. The Constitutional Court has said the process to approve these measures has been the right one, despite what some lawmakers believe. Those opposing the reform say there were failures in the process and that some of the measures don't follow the Constitution. After the decision by the Constitutional Court, the tax reform was finally approved.
The President of Panama and his Chinese counterpart have signed 19 cooperation agreements during a meeting in Panama City. They include agreements on trade, infrastructure, and tourism, among others. One of the agreements stipulates that China will provide aid to Panama, which the country will not have to repay. The two countries established diplomatic relations last year after Panama broke ties with Taiwan.
I am sure that this visit will bring our peoples, our governments, our economies even closer. But above all, it will allow Panama to continue playing that role, which it has played for a long time, but has now consolidated as a point of union between China and Latin America.
President Varela and I also appreciate the signing of cooperation instruments in areas of trade, services, commercial economic provisions, maritime and transport issues, quality inspection, justice, culture and education, and so on. Everything so that the relations of Panama and China can have a better future. Thank you very much.
The government in Argentina has approved a controversial proposal to allow the security forces to fire their weapons without giving a warning. Our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Edgardo Esteban, has the details.
The government of Mauricio Macri has approved a resolution to allow security forces to shot people by the back in certain cases. Human rights organizations have rejected the resolution they now call easy trigger. In 2017 alone, there were 258 cases of civilians shot by security forces. Now this can be used to justify the action of police forces during protests. The situation has created concern among the people.
That was Edgardo Esteban from Buenos Aires. A Colombian indigenous community are about to be displaced for a second time from the territories in Cartagena, Colombia. The Zenú indigenous people was being forced to leave the land where they lived for more than 10 years.
The main concern for our families is that we don't know where we're going. There is no plan. There are children, old people, pregnant women. We need to have a plan that takes into account the needs of our community. A good solution is that the government could leave us here, because we have already done great work. We have developed crops and productive projects. It's been more than 10 years since we've been here, and people are already used to it. Some children were born here. Authorities need to guarantee the same living conditions we have here and to guarantee lands as well.
The trial against indigenous Mapuche leader Facundo Jones Wala has begun in Chile. The prosecutor's office has requested a 15-year prison sentence for the Mapuche leader for allegedly setting a farm on fire in 2013. The lawyer for the accused says there is no evidence linking his clients to the incident. He says the accusations are designed to portray the Mapuche leader as an enemy of the Chilean nation. Bolivia has rejected a report published by the U.S. regarding their fight against human trafficking. We explain in this report.
Bolivia has denied a report by the United States regarding the fight against human trafficking in the Latin American country.
The report shows that only 44 sentences were issued between 2016 and 2017, but our report on human trafficking shows that there were 59 sentences in 2017 alone.
The U.S. report also touches on Bolivia's fight against child labor, but Bolivia's government minister said the report is unfair and threatens the country with economic sanctions.
We have always supported regional strategies to fight this kind of crimes. But we regret that the United States is not supporting our actions to fight crime because of political and ideological reasons.
Public officials say they have signed more than 20 agreements to fight human trafficking.
If Bolivia didn't have socialist and progressive views, these reports wouldn't exist. We have all the elements to objectively prove the efforts that we have made in the fight against human trafficking and child labor.
The report also announces sanctions against Bolivia and 17 other countries. The U.S. has also threatened to cut humanitarian help and commercial ties in 2019.
6 policemen were killed in Mexico City when an armed gang attacked them in a bid to free a prisoner they were transporting. One of the attackers was wounded and captured. The other attackers escaped after setting up 2 roadblocks with vehicles they hijacked and set them on fire. The state is in the home base of the Jalisco drug cartel. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has vowed to send a proposal to Senate to end presidential immunity. The proposal is aimed at ending this practice established under the Constitution by which the president cannot be taken to court. This was one of the promises the new president made during his campaign.
Today, I'm sending the first initiative to the Senate for the reform of Article 108 of the Constitution, to suspend the immunity of the President of the Republic. The President will be able to be tried like any other citizen for any crime. Of course, he will be able to be tried for the crime of corruption even in office.
After fluttering over 4,000 kilometers from Canada and across the United States, millions of monarch butterflies have landed in Mexico. The endangered butterfly embarked on this extensive journey to hibernate in the Mexican mountains for the winter months. These insects, with their 8-month lifespan, are considered to be the real seniors among butterflies. That's because a regular butterfly only lives about 5 weeks. But illegal logging and the use of herbicides and extreme weather pose a major threat to them. More news in a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back. South Africa has appointed its first woman Attorney General. President Cyril Ramaphosa named Attorney Shamila Batohi as the country's next principal legal officer. He said she has all the attributes necessary to occupy such an esteemed position. This as Ramaphosa lamented the loss of public confidence in the legal system and inaction in the face of corruption. A Palestinian man has been shot dead by Israeli security forces during an army raid in the occupied West Bank. According to sources, Israeli soldiers fired into a crowd that gathered in the area where the raid was being conducted. In the process, a 22-year-old man was shot in the head and died. 2 men had been arrested in India for setting a 20-year-old woman on fire after she accused them of sexually assaulting her. The victim suffered burns to 40% of her body and remains hospitalized. The 2 men had poured kerosene on her and set her alight while she was working in a field. The attack happened days after the woman had gone to police to report that the same man had sexually assaulted her. Her suspect attackers have since been arrested and 3 police has been suspended.
Yesterday she went to relieve herself, and when she sat down, they came from behind and poured kerosene over her, setting her on fire. She came out of the field, burning and screaming.
Food insecurity has doubled in Greece during the country's economic crisis. A recent report looks at the impact of the government's austerity policies on everyday people.
Yorgos Vagalakos is an 81-year-old retiree. In 2010, he received a pension of €1,265. In 2012, that pension was cut back to €900. Today, he only receives €685, with which he finds it near impossible to get by. The owner of a fruit stand he frequents lends him €2 so he can afford his groceries.
I often have a hard time. I go to the market, but I cannot afford the things I want. I get very depressed every time I run out of money. I just cannot afford things.
For the first time since the economic crisis started, a group of international experts have investigated the consequences of austerity measures, such as cutbacks on salaries, pensions, and public spending. They have observed that 14% of Greek citizens don't have access to food every day.
Austerity for some, but not for others, because certain actors in the food system have benefited from the years of the crisis. There's been a number of measures that have really benefited larger players in the food system. So I'm talking about larger supermarket chains. They have seen their power consolidated.
Food has dropped from accounting for 16% of a family's budget in 2008 to over 20% in 2016. The increase did not lead to a more complete number of basic goods, but actually fewer. The number of households that cannot afford beef, chicken or fish every other day has doubled from 7% to 14%. The report also shows that the crisis has hit agricultural producers and cattle farmers.
The government has not taken it upon themselves to guarantee a decent living for land workers.
The percentage of farming families living under the poverty line is 39%, 4 points higher than in the cities. Agricultural producers and cattle farmers are responsible for 4% of the GDP and make up 12% of jobs in the country.
Student protests have intensified across France in support of the Yellow Vest movement against President Emmanuel Macron. Social media videos show the front of a school on fire near Toulouse as the students block the entrance. And students also face off against the police outside schools in Marseille. About 100 French schools were blocked. Meanwhile, the French government announced the rise in fuel taxes will be suspended for 6 months.
These decisions to make immediately must bring peace and serenity to the country. They should enable us to engage in a real dialogue on all the concerns that have been expressed in the recent weeks. We must reflect together on the pace of the ecological transition while maintaining its ambition.
Yellow Vest protesters are now considering their next steps after the government's decision. Many say they don't trust the government's change of mind. While the protests began over fuel taxes, they have snowballed into a wider movement against poverty and President Macron's policies.
There's no increase, but they'll always be able to tax somewhere else, or in any case, they'll freeze it for a few months, and then, once it comes down a bit, they'll raise it. That's it. And then, for the moratorium, we don't actually want it. We want concrete things now.
Opposition and political movements in France are also calling on the government to accept responsibility for the unrest and give clearer comments.
People have learned not to trust the government's promises. What remains a moratorium on postponement is not an outright cancellation. It remains a setback that can very well turn into no setback at all. Then it is a yellow vest that will decide their movement, but I don't think that's going to be enough to get the river back into its course, because now it has overflowed and the people are waiting for something else as an answer.
Russian scientists have developed a method to study glaciers using drones. The goal is to gather data about the melting process by using specialized software. The researchers are looking to create detailed 3D images to monitor changes in the glaciers and to study global climate dynamics. And now let's take a look at some other stories making headlines from around the world.
Madagascar has kicked off the campaigning for its second round of presidential election. The runoff vote will be held on December 19th between two former presidents, Marc Ravalomanana and Andry Rajoelina. There are more than 9 million people eligible to cast their ballots.
There may be post-elections unrest, but I pray that this will not happen. I would like to raise awareness among the people, because we have had enough strikes. We must accept the result in order to move forward, because the Malagasy people are really poor and we are all victims.
More than 25 construction workers have been reportedly killed by separatist fighters in Indonesia's Papua province. One soldier was also shot dead when police and military teams arrived to investigate the incident. Pro-Papua fighters said to open fire because some workers took pictures of them. The workers were building roads and bridges in the area. 15 people have died after their boat malfunctioned and capsized off the coast of Libya. A survivor said that the 25 migrant passengers who set off from Libya to cross to Europe had gone without food and water for 12 days. Only 10 survived.
Christmas lights have been switched on in Lebanon. People enjoy fireworks, carols, and the festive spirit in downtown Beirut. Bells and an orchestra accompany a parade, and an enormous Christmas tree has also been set up in the city. And with this, we come to the end of this news brief. This and many other stories you can find at our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Thank you for watching.